Alrighty then. So we are now going to get into section 5.2 for stats, which gets into binomial probability distributions. So did you bring your calculator? Remember, calculator is going to be very important, and it's got to have the right features on it. So we're going to see those in actions soon enough. Now, binomial, we have to first define what a binomial probability distribution is. So we looked at general probability distributions last time, so we could have multiple outcomes from a procedure and get those respective probabilities for each of those outcomes. Well, now we're going to restrict it down a little bit. So instead of having a lot of different outcomes, we're going to have just two. So binomial, two. And we'll have those two categories such as true, false, yes, no, pass, fail, those types of situations. So there's only two possibilities. The one thing to keep in mind is that the probability of those does not have to be equal. You might have a 30% chance of something happening for one of the outcomes and a 70% chance for the other one. And that's okay. That's still considered a binomial probability distribution. So we kind of know what it is, but what are the real conditions that have to be met? Well, there's 4 of them. So in addition to the ones we learned about a general probability distribution, we have even more that have to be satisfied for a binomial. Okay, so the first one is the procedure has a fixed number of trials. That one is usually a pretty easy one to satisfy. You're only going to do something a certain number of times. So that's going to be pretty easy to satisfy. The second one, the trials must be independent. So the outcome of any individual trial doesn't affect the probabilities in the other trials. So that's an important one as well. And we'll see how that works in an example. Each trial must have all outcomes classified into 2 categories commonly referred to as success and failure. So again, 2 categories, we already talked about that. The fourth one, the probability of a success remains the same in all trials. Now that one's a little bit harder to, maybe ensure, but we'll see that is dependent upon the particular problem. All right, so those are the conditions we're looking for. So let's see what we got for the first example. Determine whether or not the given procedure results in a binomial distribution. For those that are not binomial, identify at least one requirement that is not satisfied. So guessing answers. The math portion of the ACT test consists of 60 multiple choice questions, each with 5 possible answers of A, B, C, D, or E, one of which is correct. Okay, so let's go through our checklist. The first one has a fixed number of trials. Well, there's 60 questions on the test, so you're only doing it 60 times. So this one is yes. Well, let me actually write down a little bit of a description. So fixed number of trials. Yes. So 60 questions. 2, independent. So remember, independent means that does the outcome of one question impact the outcome in another question? And in this case, it's a multiple choice test, so what you answer on one question is not necessarily relevant to the next one. So we're going to say yes, they are independent. Okay, and 3 is 2 outcomes. Now this one might seem a little weird because, well, wait a minute, we got 5 possible answers. That's not 2 outcomes. Well, but think about it. One of those is correct. The rest of them are wrong. So you're either getting it wrong a smaller proportion of the time than what you're getting it right. But there's only 2 outcomes. You're either right or you're wrong. So in this case, the answer is yes. Right/wrong. All right, almost there. 4, the probability of success remains the same in all trials. So what's the probability of success in this case? Well, if it's a 1 out of 5 chance, right? One of those 5 answers is correct. Which is 20% or 0.2. And it's always going to be that for every question. So all of these are satisfied. So this is a binomial probability distribution. All right. So you kind of see how you're supposed to check these. Let's just do one more just to make sure. So we got our gender selection, treating 152 couples with the Y-sort gender selection method developed by Genetics and IVF Institute and recording the ages of the parents. All right, so let's go through our list. So we got fixed number of trials. Well, there's 152 couples, so we can't do any more or less than that. So that's going to be a yes. How about 2, independent? So does the outcome from one impact the outcome from the other or from another one? They are totally independent. They're never going to impact each other, so this is going to be a yes. 3, 2 outcomes. Now, on the surface of this, you're probably saying, yeah, we're talking gender, males and females, but what's the catch? They're not asking about gender. They're trying to deceive you and thinking that they're talking about boys and girls, two outcomes. That's not what they're doing in this analysis. They're recording the ages of the parents. Is that only 2 outcomes? No, that's definitely not. So the ages vary. So you could have definitely a lot more than 2 outcomes in this case. And just for the heck of it, is the probability stay the same? Well, that doesn't even make sense, right? So that's probably a no as well. Because again, you're talking about the ages. How can you have a probability of a certain age? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So this is not a binomial probability distribution. All right. So now that we have a handle on when we have this specific type of probability distribution, let's see what we can do with it. Well, the next piece of this is a lot of notation. So let's take a look at our notation. So remember, our 2 categories are going to be, in general, going to be our success and our failures. So that's what we're going to be using for the overall identification of the outcomes. Now, probability of success is going to be a lowercase p. Probability of failure is going to be a lowercase q. And because of our complementary events, we know that if you have a probability and we want to get the rest up to 100%, we just have to subtract it from 1. So q is always going to be found the same way, 1 minus p. So if we know p, we know q. All right? Because again, 2 outcomes. N is what n always is. It's just going to be the number of fixed trials. It's our sample space. It's our sample size. It's always that type of thing. So n is that. X is going to denote the specific number of successes in n trials. So x can be any whole number between 0 and n inclusive. So it can include 0 and it can include n. But we can't go above n and we can't go less than 0. That doesn't make a lot of sense. All right, and then we know what P and Q is. P and Q are those successes and failures. And then P of X is denoting the probability of getting exactly X successes among the n trials. Note, when using a binomial probability distribution, always be sure that X and P both refer to the same category being called a success. All right, so X and P. So the number of successes, the probability of success. So you always want those 2 linked. And you will see what I mean in our first example here. So let's take a look. Consider an experiment with which 5 offspring peas are generated from 2 parents, each having the green-yellow combination of genes for pod color. Recall that the probability of an offspring pea will have a green pod is 3/4 or 0.75. That is, the probability of a green pod is 0.75. So that's fixed. Suppose we want to find the probability that exactly 3 of the 5 offspring peas have a green pod. Does this procedure result in a binomial probability distribution? Well, we got to do our 4-step check. So what was the first one? So we got a fixed number of trials, right? So is there a fixed number of trials? Well, we're looking at 5 offspring peas from parents. So we're doing it 5 times. So that's a yes. 5 times. Whoops. All right. 2. Are the trials independent? So does the outcome from one trial influence or impact another trial? No, that's not going to be the case. So yes, they are independent. 3, 2 outcomes. Well, they're looking at color. So, and the only colors that we can possibly get are green or yellow. And that's it. So yes. So green/yellow. And then 4, probability stays the same. And we already said before, the probability of a green pod is always 0.75. So that's a yes. First snap. And so this is a binomial probability distribution. Boom. Okay. So we've checked that. Now that we have one, let's use our notation and let's see what we got. If this procedure does result in a binomial distribution, identify the values of n, x, p, and q. So what do we got? So what do we got for n? Well, remember we said there was 5 trials, so n has to be 5. All right, and now if we look for x, remember is the specific number we're looking for. So suppose we want to find the probability that exactly 3 of the 5 offspring peas have a green pod. So that would be yes, that it would say that x has to be 3. 3 out of the 5. All right. P. Now, again, they want to know exactly 3 do have a green pod. So if x is 3 green pods, P needs to match that. So those two, remember, are always linked. So the probability of a green pod, we already know, was 0.75. And so Q must be, remember, it's always 1 minus P, so 1 minus 0.75, which is 0.25. And there we have it. So we got all 4 of those variables. So being able to identify those 4 variables is going to be very, very important for the next steps, which is actually finding the probabilities. So we're going to see that in the next video. So see you in a minute.